I am Janelle, 34 years old, and despite building a multi-million-dollar tech company from scratch, nothing prepared me for the words my mother-in-law spat across her dining table last night. "You'll never be good enough for my son." 5 years of trying to earn her approval financially, supporting her family, all shattered in that moment. I smiled through my tears, excused myself politely, and drove back to my mansion, where I made a decision that would change everything. Let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button if you've ever had to deal with difficult in-laws. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this ends. I met James 7 years ago at a tech conference in San Francisco. I was presenting my startup's innovative software solution that had just secured its first major round of funding. Looking back, it was one of those pivotal moments in my life. There I was, a self-made entrepreneur who had built everything from nothing, standing on stage in front of industry leaders. I never had the privilege of attending college. My parents were hard-working middle-class people who encouraged my ambitions but couldn't afford expensive tuition. Instead, I taught myself coding at 16, worked 3 jobs to save money, and launched my first small business at 22. By 27, I had transformed that small venture into a rapidly growing tech company. James approached me after my presentation, his eyes bright with genuine interest in my work. He was tall with warm brown eyes and an infectious smile that made the crowded reception hall feel intimate. As the lead software engineer for a well-established tech firm, he asked insightful questions about my company's architecture that showed he had actually paid attention to my talk. "Your approach to cloud integration is fascinating," he said. "Would you be interested in discussing it further over dinner sometime?" That first date was magical. James took me to an elegant restaurant perched on a hill overlooking the San Francisco Bay. The city lights twinkled below us as we shared stories about our lives, ambitions, and dreams. I learned that James came from a comfortable upper-middle-class family. His father was a retired professor, and his mother had been a homemaker who dedicated her life to raising James and his younger sister. "My mum is my biggest supporter," he told me that night, smiling fondly. "She sacrificed her own career ambitions to give me every opportunity. I probably wouldn't be where I am today without her." I remember feeling a flutter of admiration for this close family bond. Coming from a loving but much more independent family dynamic, I found his devotion charming. Little did I know that this devotion would become the shadow that darkened our relationship. Our connection was immediate and powerful. Within weeks, we were spending most evenings together. I found in James the perfect balance of intellectual compatibility and emotional support. He respected my ambition and celebrated my successes rather than feeling threatened by them, which had been an issue in my previous relationships. After 3 months of dating, James officially asked me to be his girlfriend during a weekend trip to Napa Valley. 6 months in, we were discussing our future together. My company continued to thrive, and I felt confident in both my professional and personal life for the first time in years. "I want you to meet my family," James said one evening as we cuddled on the couch in my apartment. "They're going to love you just as much as I do." I felt a nervous flutter in my stomach. Meeting the parents was a big step, especially since James spoke about his mother with such reverence. I wanted to make a good impression. "What if they don't like me?" I asked, voicing my insecurity. "I'm not exactly the traditional type of woman. I run a company, I travel constantly for work, and I never finished college." James pulled me closer and kissed my forehead. "They'll adore you because I adore you. My mom especially will appreciate someone who's driven and passionate. Trust me, it's going to be great." I believed him completely. Why wouldn't I? James had never given me reason to doubt his judgment. He was kind, thoughtful, and seemed to understand both me and his family well. So I agreed to fly to Seattle the following month to meet the people who had raised this wonderful man I was falling deeply in love with. In preparation, I researched appropriate gifts, read up on Seattle to make conversation, and even bought a new outfit that I thought struck the perfect balance between professional and approachable. I wanted them to see that while I was a businesswoman, I was also warm, loving, and completely devoted to their son. Looking back now, I realize I was setting myself up for disappointment. No amount of preparation could have readied me for Barbara Winston, the woman who would become the most challenging person in my life. I'll never forget the first time I met Barbara. James and I flew to Seattle on a Friday evening in autumn. The weather was crisp and clear as we drove from the airport to his childhood home in an upscale suburban neighborhood. The houses were all similar Tudor-style homes, with perfectly manicured lawns and luxury cars in the driveways. "Home sweet home," James said as we pulled into the driveway of a beautiful 2-story house with a bay window and flower boxes bursting with fall blooms. Mum has probably been cooking all day. She loves having people over. My stomach tightened with nervousness as we approached the front door. Before James could even ring the bell, it swung open to reveal Barbara Winston. She was immaculately put together. Her silver blonde hair was styled in a perfect bob, her makeup flawlessly applied to enhance her still youthful features. She wore a cream cashmere sweater, tailored slacks, and a single strand of pearls around her neck. Everything about her screamed careful curation and traditional elegance. "James, darling," she exclaimed, pulling her son into a tight embrace. She held him for what felt like an uncomfortably long time, before finally turning her attention to me. Her smile remained fixed, but her eyes changed. They swept over me from head to toe, taking in my business casual attire, my minimal jewelry, my practical shoulder-length hair. I saw the judgment in her gaze before she even spoke. "And you must be Janelle," she said, extending her hand. Her handshake was firm but brief, as if she didn't want to maintain contact longer than necessary. "We've heard so much about you." James's father, George, appeared behind her. He was a tall, gentle-looking man with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He greeted me with genuine warmth, which provided some relief from Barbara's chilly reception. Come in," Barbara said, ushering us inside. "Dinner is almost ready. I've made all of James's favourites." The interior of their home was like stepping into a traditional American home decor magazine. Everything matched perfectly, from the coordinated throw pillows to the family photos arranged in identical frames along the staircase wall. It was beautiful, but felt staged like a model home rather than a lived-in space. During the pre-dinner drinks in their formal living room, Barbara began her subtle interrogation. "So Janelle, James tells us you run your own business. How interesting. Where did you attend university?" she asked, sipping her white wine. "Actually, I didn't have the opportunity to go to college," I replied honestly. "I started working right after high school and taught myself programming. My business grew from freelance projects I took on in my early 20s. Barbara's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh, how resourceful of you. In our family, education has always been paramount. James was top of his class at Stanford, you know." "Mum," James interjected with a light laugh, "Janelle's company is valued at several $1,000,000. She's done amazing things without a traditional path." "Of course, dear," Barbara said with a tight smile. "There are always exceptions to the rule." Throughout dinner, the questions continued. Each one felt like a small test I was failing. Where did I grow up? What did my parents do? How did I possibly think I could maintain a serious relationship with my busy work schedule? Did I have any experience with homemaking or traditional family values? When I mentioned growing up in a middle-class neighborhood in Arizona, Barbara exchanged a glance with George that spoke volumes. When I described my company's success, she nodded politely but quickly changed the subject to James's recent promotion. "Your outfit is very modern," she commented at one point. "I've always believed that classic styles are more timeless. Don't you think George mumbled something non-committal and focused on his food. I was beginning to understand the dynamic. Barbara ruled this household, and George had learned long ago that peaceful acquiescence was easier than confrontation. James seemed oblivious to the undercurrent of disapproval. He cheerfully shared stories of our relationship, completely missing the way his mother's smile tightened every time he mentioned how supportive I was of his career or how much he admired my business acumen. "She'll come around," James assured me later that night as we prepared for bed in his childhood bedroom. Barbara had made it clear we would be sleeping in separate rooms despite the fact that we lived together in San Francisco. "She's just protective of me. Once she gets to know you better, she'll see what I see in you." I wanted to believe him, but something in my gut told me this was only the beginning. Barbara Winston had spent 30 years being the main woman in her son's life. She had no intention of relinquishing that position to someone she deemed unworthy. Still, I was determined to try. I loved James and wanted a good relationship with his family. Over the next few visits, I brought thoughtful gifts, helped in the kitchen, despite Barbara's obvious annoyance at my lack of culinary skills, and patiently endured her subtle digs about my background, my career, and my suitability as a potential wife for her precious son. "She just needs time," James kept saying. "Trust me, she'll love you eventually." It was a promise that would never be fulfilled, no matter how hard I tried or how much I sacrificed. 18 months after meeting his parents, James proposed. He got down on one knee at sunset on the same restaurant balcony where we'd had our first date. The ring was beautiful, a classic diamond solitaire that caught the last golden rays of the day. "Yes," I cried, tears of joy streaming down my face as he slipped the ring onto my finger. We celebrated with champagne and called our families with the happy news. My parents were ecstatic. James's father offered warm congratulations. Barbara's response was noticeably cooler. "Well, I suppose we should start planning the wedding," she said. "There's so much to consider. The Winston family has certain traditions, you know." And so began the most stressful 8 months of my life. What should have been a joyful time of preparation became a battleground, where every decision became a power struggle between Barbara's vision and mine. The Winston family has always married at St. Andrew's Episcopal Church, Barbara informed me during our first planning meeting. James was baptized there, and it would mean so much to us. The fact that I wasn't particularly religious didn't seem to matter, nor did my suggestion that we consider a beautiful outdoor venue in wine country that reflected our personalities and the beginning of our relationship. "A garden wedding, how sound casual," Barbara said dismissively. "Don't you think James deserves something more dignified?" James, caught between his mother and his fiancée, tried to mediate. "Maybe we could have the ceremony at the church and the reception at an outdoor venue," he suggested. This became the pattern. I would express a preference, Barbara would override it with tradition, and James would propose a compromise that inevitably leaned toward his mother's wishes. Slowly but surely, my dream wedding transformed into Barbara's vision of propriety. I wanted a modern, streamlined wedding dress. Barbara insisted I try on puffy princess-style gowns with long trains. "A bride should look timeless," she said, "not like she's attending a business function." I wanted a diverse international menu reflecting our love of travel. Barbara pushed for traditional American fare. "Many of our family friends have simple tastes," she explained. "We wouldn't want to make them uncomfortable." Even our guest list became contentious. Barbara added dozens of family friends and distant relatives I'd never met, while questioning the inclusion of several of my close business associates. "A wedding is for family, dear," she said. "Surely your work colleagues understand that." Throughout this process, I began noticing the whispers. At the bridal shower, Barbara insisted on hosting. I overheard her talking to her sister in the kitchen. "James could have had anyone you know," she said in a hushed tone. "That Hamilton girl from his college days is a pediatric surgeon now. Such a shame they drifted apart." During a cake tasting, I excused myself to use the restroom and returned to hear Barbara telling the baker, "We're just trying to make the best of the situation. James has always been impulsive when it comes to his heart." Each comment was a small cut, but I endured them for James's sake. I told myself that once we were married, things would improve. Barbara would have to accept me eventually. The wedding itself was beautiful but stressful. Barbara managed to look both tearful and disapproving as James and I exchanged vows. At the reception, she spent more time directing the catering staff than celebrating with guests. When James and I shared our first dance, I caught her watching with a strange expression of resignation and determination. Despite the tensions, I entered our marriage with optimism. My company continued to thrive, expanding into new markets and nearly doubling in value within the first year of our marriage. James's career also flourished, his engineering brilliance recognized with promotions and accolades. We bought our first home together, a beautiful modern house in an exclusive neighborhood with views of the bay. It was around this time that Barbara began making financial requests. It started small. "James mentioned your company is doing so well," she said during one of our monthly family dinners. "George and I have been thinking of renovating our kitchen. Nothing extravagant, of course, but the appliances are quite outdated." Before I could respond, James jumped in. "We'd be happy to help, wouldn't we, Janelle?" Put on the spot, I agreed. It seemed like a reasonable way to contribute to the family and perhaps win some approval from Barbara. The kitchen renovation turned into a complete first-floor remodel, costing nearly 3 times the initial estimate. But I paid without complaint. Next came James's sister's graduate school tuition. Then a new car for George and Barbara, when their reliable old Volvo suddenly became unsafe at any speed. Each request was framed as a family obligation that James automatically agreed to using our joint finances, or more often my significantly larger income. I didn't mind sharing my success with family. What bothered me was that with each gift, each payment, Barbara seemed to resent me more rather than less. It was as if accepting help from me only reinforced her belief that I wasn't good enough for her son, despite being good enough to fund her lifestyle upgrades. As our second wedding anniversary approached, the dynamics with Barbara shifted from passive-aggressive disapproval to active interference. Our life together was comfortable and prosperous, but an undercurrent of tension ran beneath the surface. James and I had moved into our dream home, a stunning contemporary mansion overlooking the bay. With 6 bedrooms, a home theatre infinity pool, and a dedicated office space for each of us, it represented everything we had worked for. I decorated it with a blend of modern aesthetics and warm, inviting elements that made it distinctly ours. When Barbara first visited, her lips pursed into a thin line as she surveyed our open-concept living area with its floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist furniture. "It's very showy," she commented, running a finger along our Italian marble countertop. "All this space for just the 2 of you. It seems rather excessive and impersonal. Where are the family photos, the heirlooms? A house should feel like a home, not a hotel." I had actually placed several framed photos of us with both of our families throughout the house, including a prominent one of James with his parents in the entryway. There were even spaces specifically designed with future children in mind. But Barbara saw what she wanted to see. Her visits, originally monthly, increased in frequency until she was appearing at our doorstep weekly, often without calling ahead. She would arrive with grocery bags, insisting that she needed to stock our refrigerator with proper food, or with decor items that she felt would make our house more homey. "I was just in the neighborhood," became her standard explanation, despite living over an hour away. These surprise visits often occurred when James was home, but I was working in my office. Barbara would monopolize his attention, reminiscing about his childhood or discussing family matters that subtly excluded me. If I joined them, she would shift the conversation to topics where I had little to contribute. One Saturday morning, I came downstairs to find Barbara rearranging my carefully organized kitchen cabinets. "Good morning, Janelle," she said without pausing her work. "I noticed your dishes were arranged quite inefficiently. In a proper home, the everyday plates should be more accessible than formal dinnerware." "Barbara," I said, trying to keep my voice level, "I appreciate your thinking of us, but I had those organized in a way that works for how we use the kitchen." "Well, dear," she replied with a condescending smile, "when you have more experience managing a home, you'll understand the importance of proper organization. James grew up with certain standards." James, sipping coffee at the island counter, gave me an apologetic look but said nothing. His silence hurt more than his mother's words. The comments about starting a family began around this time too. At every gathering, Barbara would find a way to mention James's cousins' new babies or ask pointed questions about our family planning. "You're not getting any younger, Janelle," she would say, despite the fact that I was only 31. "Career women often wait too long and then regret it. James would make such a wonderful father." The truth was, James and I had discussed children and agreed to wait a few more years. My company was at a critical growth stage, and we both wanted to be financially secure and have more time together before taking that step. But Barbara made it sound as if I was selfishly denying James his chance at fatherhood. "Maybe you should talk to that nice Dr. Reynolds about your options," she suggested, once directly implying fertility might be an issue. Women in business often don't realize how stress affects their reproductive systems. Meanwhile, the financial request continued and expanded. James's sister needed a down payment for her first home. The family lake house needed extensive repairs. A second cousin's child required specialized medical treatment not covered by insurance. For each request, I wrote checks without complaint, hoping that my generosity might finally earn Barbara's acceptance. I paid for family vacations, holiday gatherings, and even funded a substantial renovation of their home. By our 3rd anniversary, I had contributed over $250,000 to the Winston family. Yet Barbara's attitude toward me only worsened. Behind my back, she began suggesting to James that he could do better than me. She would casually mention running into old girlfriends or the daughters of her friends who were such traditional family-oriented girls. James became increasingly distant, spending more time with his mother and family without me. When I would confront him about Barbara's behavior, he would sigh and say, "That's just how she is, Janelle. She doesn't mean anything by it. Can't you try a little harder to get along with her?" For me, I felt like I was losing my husband to his mother. More painful was the realization that he couldn't see what was happening. The strong, supportive man I had fallen in love with became passive and conflict avoidant when it came to Barbara. In his eyes, the problem wasn't his mother's behavior, but my reaction to it. Alone in our beautiful mansion, I began to question everything. Was I overreacting? Was I not trying hard enough? Or was I trapped in a relationship where I would never be accepted? Because I didn't fit Barbara's image of the perfect wife for her son, the doubts crept in like a slow tide, gradually eroding my confidence and happiness. Something would have to give, but I never imagined it would happen in such a devastating and public way. The evening that changed everything was supposed to be a celebration. It was James's 35th birthday, and Barbara had insisted on hosting a family dinner at her home. A birthday should be celebrated with family, she declared, leaving no room for the romantic dinner I had originally planned for just the two of us. I spent hours selecting the perfect gift for James, a rare vintage watch he had admired months earlier and had it specially engraved with our initials and the date. I wore a blue dress he had once complimented, styled my hair the way he liked it, and prepared myself mentally for an evening of Barbara's subtle barbs. When we arrived, the house was filled with family members, including several I had never met before. Barbara greeted James with an exuberant hug and kiss, then gave me a brief nod before ushering him away to mingle with relatives. I found myself alone in the entryway, holding my carefully wrapped gift and a bouquet of flowers for Barbara that she had barely acknowledged. The dining table was elaborately set, with the family's best china and silver. Place cards marked each person's designated seat. James was at one end of the table with Barbara at his right hand. My place card was halfway down the table between James's elderly great-aunt and a cousin's teenage son, as far from James as possible while still being at the same table. Throughout the appetizer course, Barbara regaled everyone with stories of James's childhood achievements, pointedly noting how she had sacrificed and nurtured his talents. "A mother knows best what her child needs to succeed," she said, looking directly at me. "Some things just can't be replaced with money or career success." When it came time for the main course, Barbara emerged from the kitchen carrying a steaming dish with flourish. "Your absolute favourite, James. Beef Wellington with truffle sauce, just the way you've always loved it." James's face lit up. "Mum, you didn't have to go to all this trouble." "Nothing is too much trouble for my son," she replied, serving him a generous portion. "I've been making this for your birthday since you were 16. Some traditions are sacred." The implication was clear. She knew what James loved in a way that I supposedly did not. The fact that James had told me multiple times that his favourite meal was actually my homemade pasta carbonara seemed irrelevant in that moment. As dinner progressed, Barbara skillfully directed the conversation toward family matters that excluded me, interspersed with comments about James's past relationships. "Do you remember Amanda Pearson, James? Her mother told me she's just been made head of pediatric surgery at Boston Children's Hospital. Still single, apparently. She always had such a lovely way with children." I maintained my composure, smiling politely and making conversation with those seated near me. I was determined not to give Barbara the satisfaction of seeing me upset. The situation escalated when Barbara brought out a photo album during dessert. "I thought everyone might enjoy seeing some pictures of James growing up," she announced, placing the album directly in front of him, angled away from me. As family members gathered around cooing over baby pictures and teenage James, Barbara paused at a photo of him at his senior prom. This was James with Catherine Montgomery, such a sweet girl from a wonderful family. Her father was the dean at Stanford, you know. She looked up, catching my eye across the table. She always understood the importance of family traditions. Some women just naturally understand their role, don't they? I felt James glance at me, but he remained silent, allowing his mother's comments to stand unchallenged. The hurt and anger built inside me, but I maintained my calm exterior. Then Barbara mentioned our upcoming anniversary. "James tells me you're planning a trip to Italy," she said with obvious disapproval. "That seems rather extravagant when you could be saving for more important things." "Like what, Barbara?" I asked politely, though I could feel my patience wearing thin. "Well, a proper home in a family-friendly neighbourhood for one thing. That modern glass house you live in is hardly suitable for children. And speaking of children, that biological clock doesn't stop ticking just because you're busy with your company, dear." The table fell uncomfortably silent. Even those family members who usually enjoyed Barbara's dramatics seemed to sense she had crossed a line. I took a deep breath. "James and I are quite happy with our home and our timeline for starting a family, but thank you for your concern." Barbara's eyes narrowed. "Concern is what mothers feel when they see their sons making compromises they'll regret later. James deserves a traditional family life, with a wife who puts him first, not her career." "Mum," James finally interjected, though his tone was more pleading than assertive, "this isn't really dinner conversation." Barbara placed her hand over her son's. "I'm only thinking of your happiness, darling. I've watched you settle for less than you deserve for years now. Someone has to say something." "What exactly are you trying to say, Barbara?" I asked, my voice steady, despite the anger and hurt boiling inside me. She looked at me directly, her expression cold and determined. The room seemed to hold its collective breath. "I'm saying what everyone in this family knows but is too polite to tell you. You'll never be good enough for my son, not with your background, your priorities, your inability to create a proper home. James needs someone who understands family values, not someone who thinks throwing money around makes up for everything else that's lacking. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked at James, waiting for him to defend me, to put a stop to his mother's cruelty. Instead, he stared at his plate and mumbled, "Mum doesn't mean it like that, she's just concerned." In that moment, something broke inside me. 5 years of trying to be accepted, of financial support, of turning the other cheek, all shattered with his weak response. I carefully placed my napkin beside my plate and stood up. My hands were shaking, but my voice was calm. "Thank you for dinner, Barbara. I think it's time for me to go." Without waiting for a response, I collected my purse and walked out. No one, not even James, immediately followed me. As I got into my car, I finally allowed the tears to fall. But alongside the pain was something new, something powerful. A sense of clarity and resolve I hadn't felt in years. It was time to stop being a victim in my own life. Time to remember who I was before I started trying to earn Barbara Winston's approval. Time to decide what I really wanted and deserved. I drove back to our mansion alone, tears streaming down my face, but a plan already forming in my mind. The drive home from Barbara's house took 45 minutes, but it felt like both an eternity and an instant. My mind raced through every slight, every passive-aggressive comment, every time James had failed to stand up for me over the past 5 years. By the time I pulled into our circular driveway, my sadness had crystallized into something harder and more powerful resolve. I walked through our beautiful empty house, suddenly seeing it through new eyes. This was my sanctuary, bought largely with my success decorated to my taste, despite Barbara's criticisms. Yet I had allowed her to make me feel like an intruder in my own home, like someone who didn't belong in her son's life, despite being his wife. In our home office, I sat at my desk and made a list of everything I had sacrificed and endured for the sake of my marriage. 1. Financial support for Barbara and George's home renovations. 2. Tuition for James's sister's graduate program. 3. New car for the in-laws. 4. Down payment for sister-in-law's house. 5. Medical expenses for extended family. 6. Countless family vacations. 7. Holiday gatherings. 8. Emergency fund for the family lake house. The list went on, spanning 2 full pages. Beyond the financial contributions were the emotional costs, the constant criticism, the undermining of my confidence, the strain on my marriage, the subtle alienation from my husband. I had given so much and received so little in return. With hands that no longer shook, I picked up my phone and called David Schaefer, my personal attorney, who had helped me navigate my company's growth. "David, I need your help with some personal financial matters," I said when he answered despite the late hour. "I need to make some changes to my accounts and investments. Tonight." David, ever professional, didn't question the urgency. "I'll be available in 20 minutes for a video call. Will that work?" "Perfect. Thank you." While waiting for his call, I logged into my banking accounts and began taking inventory of exactly what financial entanglements existed between my assets and the Winston family. The amount was staggering, nearly $333,000 over 5 years, not including the joint accounts I shared with James. When David appeared on my screen, I laid out my situation succinctly. I need to freeze all financial support to my in-laws immediately. No more automatic payments, no access to any of my personal accounts or business holdings. I also want to temporarily secure my portion of the joint accounts I share with my husband until we can have a serious conversation about our future. David's expression remained neutral, but I could see concern in his eyes. "Janelle, are you safe? Is this an emergency situation?" "I'm physically safe," I assured him, "but I've reached my breaking point emotionally. My mother-in-law made it explicitly clear tonight that she doesn't accept me and never will, despite years of financial support. My husband failed to defend me. I need to protect myself while I decide what comes next." For the next hour, David guided me through the necessary steps. We froze the automatic payments to Barbara's renovation account and the monthly stipend that went to various Winston family members. We secured my personal assets and created a record of all the financial support I had provided over the years, should it become necessary in the future. "What about your husband?" David asked carefully. "Should we be preparing for separation documents?" I hesitated. Despite everything, I still loved James. The problem had never been a lack of love, but rather his inability to prioritize our marriage over his mother's demands and manipulation. "Not yet," I finally said. "I want to give him one chance to understand what's happening and make a choice. But I need to be prepared for either outcome." After finishing with David, I took a long shower, letting the hot water wash away the tension in my shoulders. I changed into comfortable clothes and made myself a cup of tea. Then I systematically blocked Barbara's number on my phone, removed her from my social media accounts, and asked my assistant to ensure she would no longer have access to my office or schedule. It was nearly midnight when I heard James's key in the door. I was sitting in our living room calm and centered in a way I hadn't felt in years. He entered looking flustered and upset. "Janelle, what the hell? You just left in the middle of my birthday dinner. Mom is really upset." In that moment, hearing him prioritize his mother's feelings yet again, I almost laughed. Almost. "Sit down, James," I said quietly. "We need to talk. If this is about what Mom said, you know she gets carried away sometimes. She didn't mean it the way it sounded. She meant exactly what she said, James. And what bothers me most isn't even her words. It's that you sat there and let her say them." His face flushed. "What was I supposed to do 'cause a scene at my own birthday dinner? You were supposed to defend your wife," I replied, my voice steady. "You were supposed to tell your mother that speaking to me that way is unacceptable. You were supposed to choose our marriage over her approval." James ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "You're being oversensitive. Mom is just traditional and protective. If you'd try harder to understand her perspective." "I've been trying to understand her perspective for 5 years, James. I've been financially supporting her lifestyle, tolerating her criticism, and watching our marriage erode because of her interference. And you've let it happen." I took a deep breath and continued. "I've made some changes tonight. I've stopped all financial support to your family. No more renovations, no more allowances, no more blank checks." His eyes widened. "You can't do that. They're counting on that money for the lake house repairs next month." "I absolutely can do that. It's my money earned from the career your mother constantly belittles. And the fact that your first concern is about the money rather than the way I was treated tonight tells me everything I need to know." James paced the room, his anger building. "So what, this is some kind of ultimatum? My family or you?" "No, James. This is a boundary I should have set years ago. I will no longer tolerate being treated as if I'm not good enough for you. I will no longer financially support people who don't respect me. And I will no longer be married to someone who won't stand up for our relationship." My words hung in the air between us. For the first time that night, James seemed to really see me, to understand the gravity of the situation. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "I'm saying you have a choice to make. Either you set clear boundaries with your mother and we work together to rebuild our marriage, or we go our separate ways. I love you, James, but I love myself too. And I won't keep diminishing myself to fit into someone else's idea of who I should be." James sank onto the couch, the anger draining from his face. "She's my mother, Janelle. I can't just cut her off." "I'm not asking you to cut her off. I'm asking you to stand up for me, for us. To tell her that her behavior is damaging our marriage and it needs to stop. To prioritize being a husband over being a son." We talked for hours that night, really talked in a way we hadn't in years. James finally began to see the pattern that had been so clear to me for so long. He admitted that he had avoided conflict with his mother his entire life, that it was easier to ask me to accommodate her than to challenge her behavior. "I don't want to lose you," he said as dawn began to break outside our windows. "I'll talk to her. I'll make her understand that things need to change." "It's not about making her understand," I replied gently. "It's about you setting boundaries regardless of whether she understands or agrees. And it's about consequences if those boundaries aren't respected." When Barbara called the next morning, frantic after discovering her renovation account had been frozen, I let the call go to voicemail. She called 6 more times, each message more desperate and angry than the last. When she couldn't reach me, she called James. I could hear her voice through the phone shrill with indignation. "What does she mean she's cutting us off after everything we've done for her? You need to fix this, James. Remind her of her obligations to this family." I watched my husband's face as he listened, saw the conflict, the lifelong pattern of acquiescence, battling with his new awareness. Finally he spoke. "Mom, you need to stop. What you said to Janelle last night was cruel and untrue. She has been nothing but generous to this family, and you've treated her terribly in return." There was a pause as Barbara responded, her voice too muffled for me to hear clearly. "No, Mom," James continued. "This isn't Janelle manipulating me. This is me finally seeing what's been happening. The financial support is over. If you want to have a relationship with us moving forward, you need to apologize to Janelle and make a genuine effort to respect our marriage." When he hung up, his hands were shaking, but his eyes were clear. "She's furious," he said. "Says I'm choosing money over blood." "And what do you think?" I asked. "I think I'm finally choosing my wife and my future. I should have done it years ago." It was a start. A small step on what would be a long road toward healing our marriage and establishing healthy boundaries with his family. I knew Barbara wouldn't surrender her control easily, that there would be tears and guilt trips and attempts to drive wedges between us. But for the first time in years, I felt hope. Not because James had magically transformed overnight, but because I had found my voice and my worth again. I had remembered that I deserved respect in my marriage and from my extended family. I had finally stopped trying to be good enough for Barbara Winston and started being good enough for myself. 6 months after that fateful birthday dinner, our lives had transformed in ways I never could have predicted. The journey wasn't easy, but it was necessary and ultimately healing for both James and me. The weeks following my confrontation with James were tense and challenging. Barbara launched an all-out campaign to regain control cycling through every manipulation tactic in her arsenal. She called James constantly, alternating between tearful pleas about financial hardship and angry accusations about me turning her son against her. When that didn't work, she enlisted family members to call on her behalf, painting herself as the victim of a cruel daughter-in-law. "Your mother says they might lose the lake house," James's sister called to tell him. "How could you let Janelle do this to our family?" The old James would have crumbled under this pressure. But something had shifted in him that night. Perhaps it was seeing the itemized list of all we had contributed to his family over the years, or perhaps it was finally recognizing the toll his mother's behavior had taken on our marriage. Whatever the catalyst, he stood firm. "The lake house was a luxury purchased with Janelle's money, not a necessity," he told his sister. "If maintaining it is important to the family, then the family can contribute to its upkeep. That's how the real world works." 3 weeks after our confrontation, James suggested we try couples therapy. "I want to fix this," he said. "I want to be a better husband, and I need help learning how to set boundaries with my family." Dr. Melissa Chen, our therapist, helped us navigate the complex dynamics at play. In our sessions, James began to understand how his childhood had shaped his conflict avoidance with his mother. "Barbara raised you to believe that her happiness was your responsibility," Dr. Chen explained. "That's a common pattern in enmeshed parent-child relationships, but it's not healthy for adult relationships." James nodded slowly. "I always thought I was being a good son by keeping the peace. I never realized I was sacrificing my marriage in the process." For me, therapy helped address the resentment and hurt I had accumulated over years of trying to earn Barbara's approval. I learned that I had my own patterns to break, particularly my tendency to use financial generosity as a way to buy acceptance. "You can't purchase someone's genuine respect," Dr. Chen told me, and trying to do so often creates unhealthy power dynamics that breed more resentment, not less. The real breakthrough came during a session in our 3rd month of therapy. James had just described another guilt-inducing call from his mother. "I feel trapped," he admitted. "I love my mother, but I'm starting to see how manipulative she can be. I just don't know how to have a relationship with her that doesn't involve her controlling my life." Dr. Chen leaned forward. "The question isn't whether you can have a relationship with your mother, James. It's what kind of relationship is healthy for you and your marriage. Some people can only be in your life if there are strong boundaries in place." That concept of boundaries as a means of having relationships rather than ending them was transformative for James. He began to see that setting limits with his mother wasn't an act of betrayal, but an act of love, both for himself and for our marriage. Meanwhile, Barbara was growing increasingly desperate as her financial support remained cut off. After 2 months of frozen accounts and ignored calls, she showed up at our front door unannounced. I was alone at home working in my office when the security system alerted me to her presence. Through the camera, I could see her standing on our porch, looking simultaneously angry and diminished, somehow less formidable than I remembered. For a moment, I considered not answering, but something in me knew that avoidance would only prolong the inevitable confrontation. So I went to the door and opened it, maintaining a calm exterior despite my racing heart. "Barbara," I said simply, "I need to speak with James," she replied, attempting to step past me into the house. I didn't move from the doorway. "James is at work. I'd be happy to let him know you stopped by." Her face hardened. "This situation has gone on long enough, Janelle. The lake house repairs are overdue and the bank is asking questions about the renovation loan. Whatever point you're trying to make has been made. It's time to stop this childish behavior." "This isn't about making a point, Barbara. This is about respect. You made it clear that you don't think I'm good enough for your son. I've simply decided to stop trying to buy your approval with financial support. So this is blackmail, she asked incredulously. Fix our relationship or you'll punish the entire family financially. I shook my head. Not blackmail, natural consequences. Relationships are built on mutual respect. You can't expect to treat someone poorly and still benefit from their generosity. Barbara's facade cracked slightly, revealing the fear beneath her anger. We need that money, Janelle. We've made commitments based on James's promises. James's promises about my money, I corrected gently. And that's part of the problem. James and I are working on our marriage now, including how we make financial decisions together. Any future support for family would need to be a mutual decision, not an automatic expectation. She stared at me for a long moment, calculation visible in her eyes. Finally, she straightened her shoulders. What would it take? An apology fine. I'm sorry if my words hurt your feelings at the birthday dinner. I was emotional and spoke too harshly. The insincerity was palpable, but I appreciated the effort it must have taken for a woman like Barbara to offer even this hollow apology. Thank you for that, Barbara. But rebuilding trust takes more than words. It requires consistent actions over time. James and I are seeing a therapist to work on our marriage. Perhaps you'd consider joining us for a session to discuss how we can move forward as a family with healthier boundaries. Her expression made it clear what she thought of therapy, but financial necessity apparently outweighed her distaste. If that's what it takes, I suppose I could attend one session. That first therapy session with Barbara was as difficult as I had anticipated. She was defensive, dismissive of Dr. Chen's insights, and resistant to the idea that she had any responsibility for the damaged relationships. But she attended a second session and then a third. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, tiny cracks appeared in her rigid worldview. I harbour no illusions that Barbara Winston will ever truly accept me as her equal or fully approve of me as her son's wife. Some prejudices and patterns are too deeply ingrained to completely overcome, but we have reached a detente of sorts, a careful civility built on clear boundaries and consequences. James and I have grown stronger through this challenge. 4 months after the confrontation, we made the decision to relocate to Austin, Texas for a fresh start. My company had an office there and James found an excellent position with a tech firm that valued his skills. The physical distance from Seattle has been healing, allowing us to build our life together without the constant shadow of Barbara's interference. We bought a new home smaller than our San Francisco mansion, but warm and truly ours. James has become more assertive not just with his family, but in all aspects of his life. He's learning to voice his needs and stand up for what matters to him. I've seen him blossom into the strong, confident man I always knew he could be when freed from the patterns of his childhood. As for me, I've found a community of women who understand my experience. A support group for those dealing with difficult in-laws has become an unexpected source of friendship and healing. Sharing stories and strategies with others who have walked similar paths has helped me process my feelings and find humor in even the most challenging situations. My company continues to thrive, and I've redirected some of the money that once went to the Winston family toward causes I believe in, including a scholarship fund for young women entrepreneurs without college degrees. Turning my painful experience into an opportunity to help others has been profoundly healing. Barbara and George visit occasionally staying in a nearby hotel rather than our guest room. These visits are brief, structured, and governed by the boundaries James has firmly established. Barbara still makes the occasional cutting remark or passive-aggressive comment, but now James addresses them immediately rather than letting them pass. "Mum, that's not appropriate, my nep." He'll say calmly but firmly, "If you can't speak respectfully to Janelle, this visit will need to end early." The financial support has been renegotiated as well. We provide targeted assistance for specific needs that James and I agree upon together, rather than the blank check Barbara once enjoyed. Each contribution is acknowledged as a gift rather than an obligation, and comes with clear expectations about how it will be used. The journey hasn't been perfect. There have been setbacks, moments of doubt, and painful confrontations. But through it all, I've rediscovered my worth and my voice. I've learnt that true love shouldn't require diminishing yourself to please others, and that setting healthy boundaries is an act of self-respect. Most importantly, I've realized that good enough isn't determined by someone else's arbitrary standards or expectations. It's about being authentic, standing in your truth, and valuing yourself enough to walk away from relationships that demand your self-erasure. Sometimes you have to lose a part of yourself to find your whole self again, And that was the unexpected gift I received from a woman who once told me I would never be good enough. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who didn't respect your relationship? Share your experience in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength through challenging relationships. Remember, standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's necessary for your well-being. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it helps someone else find their voice too.